What's up, guys, and welcome to the Fantasy Mafia podcast. I am joined back here again with Blake and Jordan, aka Dr. Fantasy. We are doing our top 15 fantasy wide receiver rankings for PPR. It's actually not our rankings. We found a consensus list online using Fantasy Pros. So we did 30 to 16 last week. So today we're going to do the top 15. And we're starting it out here with Robert Woods. He comes in at 15. Last week we ended at Cooper Kupp. So his teammate Robert Woods are going right next to each other in a lot of drafts that we're seeing and doing. Mock drafts are going right next to each other. And for good reason too. Robert Woods, I'll start out talking about him. Robert Woods is coming off his second straight 1,000-yard season. He did take a dip in the touchdown department from 6 in 2018 down to 2 in 2019. But he did play. He played all games but one. It was his career high in targets, his career high in receptions, and then he had less yards than 2018, but he still had over 1,000. He had 1,134 yards. He also had a touchdown on the ground too. They do like to use him a lot when they on those end around plays, and Jordan could probably tell you, since he's a Rams fan, you always see Woods coming around on an end around, probably at least like once a game or so. He took one to the house, but he's to be wide receiver 15, it's a great spot for him. Like I said, he's going pretty much back to back with Cooper Kupp. You see one of them go, then you see the next one go like right after within the next couple picks, and you'll probably get between the two of them. You'll probably get Kupp getting more touchdowns, but you're probably going to get more yards and catches from Robert Woods. And if you're in a PPR league, then that's perfectly fine. He's a solid wide receiver to pair him up with, maybe if you get like a Julio Jones or something in the late first, early second round, turn around and grab Robert Woods in the third, fourth round, and that's a nice 1-2 punch from your wide receiver position. Anybody want to chime in on him before we go to 14?
I'll let Jordan finish us off with Robert Woods, because I know he's such a Robert Woods / Cooper Kupp fan. But I agree with all of what you said. I think Robert Woods is like the number one deep threat there in the Rams. Like I think he's like the most kind of consistent. He might not be always the flashiest, but if you're between him and another player and you're kind of neck and neck, those you're not going to draft him for this reason by any means. But those go around, the rushing he kind of gets in there is a nice little boost, and he does it enough that it's a nice little added bonus. So I think he's definitely a player to target, especially because I like targeting the later of those Rams players. I've done it the last 3 years. I always get the cheapest one. The one thing I will say, though, is today that what came out I saw on Roto World was Josh Reynolds seems to be the steady number 3 wide receiver ahead of Van Jefferson. So Josh Reynolds is pretty deep there for a lot of leagues. So maybe I'll draft him real late in the last round over Robert Woods. But, if I have Robert Woods there staring me down in one of these early rounds, I'm definitely taking him for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a tale of two stories right now with these Rams wide receivers. You're seeing Cooper Kupp's ADP drop pretty fast, and Robert Woods has steadily been climbing. And I think Woods is starting to climb to an area where I'm not quite as comfortable. He was 12th in points per game last season. I think he's a really safe pick, but I think his upside is kind of limited now for where his ADP is rising to. So that's my biggest issue with him, is I don't think you're getting the value anymore. I would guarantee that he finishes probably a top 24 wide receiver, no doubt. So he's a safe pick now, but I'm not loving where his ADP is at right now.
All right.
Yeah, if Kupp ends up being the one that drops further down, I don't know how that keeps happening. I'll definitely snatch up Kupp. It's really just a matter of value, I think, for them.
And then before we get to 14, just if anybody is not familiar with Fantasy Pros website, and I don't want to really plug them, but that's what we're using. You could always see like the best rankings, the worst rankings, and if you actually click on the player, you can see like who ranked them and where they had them ranked. And between Kupp and Woods, Kupp was ranked number 2 best by somebody, where Woods was 6. But the funny thing is they were both ranked as the worst, 32. So like they both had him like no lower than 32 and like right at 32. So that's how similar these two guys are. Like I said, Kupp was ranked higher by 1 or 2 people between the two of them, but as far as like their lowest it was the same.
And again, don't want to plug them, but the nice thing about their rankings too is you can see like the most recent people, like they would have had to update their ranks in the last week, 2 weeks, or whatever. So if something happens, you can actually like filter it by how recent the rankings are for any player. So that's nice too.
Yeah, they're kind of just like a filter for all of us fantasy guys. Next one, we got Adam Thielen, and I believe this one was you, Blake.
Yeah, so I had Adam Thielen here. I liked Adam Thielen a couple years ago, but I mean last year obviously he kind of burned us a little bit just because of his injuries. I mean he had what did he have last year? He had 6 touchdowns. I mean not like terrible, but he had only played 10 games, and I think if he's healthy this year, he's definitely a nice little value. I think people kind of forget about him. I know a lot of people were kind of trying to get away from the Vikings pass catchers this year just because outside of Adam Thielen, who else was there? BC Johnson kind of came on last year, and he's a nice little sleeper. He seems to be doing well in camp right now, and he seems to be kind of competing with Justin Jefferson. So people weren't too sure if they wanted to take Adam Thielen, but I'll definitely take him as 2 or 3. I think he is going to fall in the draft. So he's a nice little value. And not that Diggs, and Thielen had the same kind of targets, but I mean, the targets from Diggs had to go somewhere. And even though they are a run first team, they're still going to have to throw the ball at some time. So I'll definitely like Thielen as a wide receiver 3 if I can get him there. I think he's a little too rich for my blood at taking him as a wide receiver 2, though.
Okay, yeah, I mean he's kind of was the 1A there for a while, even with Diggs there, but now he is definitely the one there. Obviously, they drafted Justin Jefferson in the first round, and with how crazy the world's going on right now and lack of training camp and just getting into mini camp and throwing on pads within the past day or two, it's going to take a little bit for Justin Jefferson to kind of get acclimated there. But Adam Thielen, I mean, he is coming at a little bit of a discount, which is definitely intriguing in where I would take him. And yeah, I mean, I really don't have a problem with him at all. His quarterback is accurate. They are going to probably throw it a little bit less. They still have Dalvin Cook there. They're going to try to get Alex Madison in there a little bit more. You got Irv Smith going into his second year, where we see a lot of tight ends tend to do better. Plus, Kyle Rudolph is still there, so there are some targets to go around. But Adam Thielen picking up a little bit of slack that Stephon Diggs is possibly leaving behind is definitely a boost there. Jordan, if you want to say a little bit about Thielen, you can. If not, we're going to jump into number 13. Who wears number 13? Odell Beckham.
Yeah, so I'll roll into Odell Beckham here. And I'm probably going to squash some dreams here, but I'm not as high on Odell Beckham as a lot of other people on our page. I mean, the reason for me is I'm just not confident in his role in this new offense that Kevin Stefanski is bringing. And I think people have to realize the culture with the Browns is going to change a little bit here. This is a defense that's much improved. They're not going to be playing from behind all the time. I think you're going to see them try to control the clock, similar to what Minnesota did in the past with Dalvin Cook and a strong defense. I really think that's the goal here, and you kind of saw that with the big contract they just gave Myles Garrett. So I really think you're starting to see where their priorities lie, and based on what he did with the Vikings offense last season, they were 4th in rushing attempts. They had the 3rd fewest passing attempts. So I really question if there's going to be enough volume to go around for Beckham and Landry for them to provide high-end fantasy value. You know, they'll both have their roles. They'll probably be solid wide receiver 2s, but I see Beckham creeping up just because of his talent. And I get it. I mean, if you're ranking wide receivers based on talent alone, I'd put him in the top 5 probably, but fantasy is not always about talent. It's about volume and opportunity. And I'm just kind of questioning what his role is going to be in this offense overall. And even last season, he averaged the 33rd most points per game. The Browns were 20th in pass attempts. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they stayed around that number or if they even dipped a little bit. So I'm just not confident enough in him to take him as my wide receiver 1 or realistically a high-end wide receiver 2. So we'll see how it pans out. But I think the Browns culture is changing pretty quickly here.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add there is Odell Beckham. Actually, I don't think anyone realizes this, but we always give Sammy Watkins such a bad rep for being injury prone. Odell Beckham's missed more time than Sammy Watkins has. I'm not looking for that in like my wide receiver 1. I can't risk that that early. And where's his upside been lately? It really hasn't been there. So I'm not looking to draft Odell Beckham if I can avoid him. I think he's probably on my do not draft list.
Yeah, he's right on the borderline of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1, depending on how many teams are in your league. That, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a toss up right there. I mean, if it's between Beckham or Adam Thielen or Robert Woods, one of the guys that we talked about here, I'd probably lean Woods' way. But I mean, you can't really go wrong with Beckham. The one thing I just want to bring up about him, and obviously, like we preach it all the time. You always want to start your studs, and it's starting to get like the term stud is loosely thrown around, but you got to think about just off the top of my head in his division, without knowing who he plays week 17, which is obviously a divisional game, but 6 games against defenses that are really good secondaries. Cincinnati boosted their secondary this offseason, and Baltimore and Pittsburgh have had a good secondary. So like you might run into some rough games just right there, just within the division. Then there's 10 other games that he has to play, but just his divisional opponents have pretty solid secondaries that could kind of shut him down. Rolling into number 12 here, so this would be the end of wide receiver ones. If you're in a 12-team league, this is Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. He's coming off his best season of his career. His second best season for catches, he had 79. He had 83 back in Oakland, but his best season all around, he had most yards, most touchdowns, and I think he gets a little bit of a boost, even though some people must think that he drops a little bit because of their draft pick, but I think he gets a little bit of a boost by them drafting CeeDee Lamb. Obviously, again, it's another rookie in that offense. So, but CeeDee Lamb, he's obviously going to be on the field week 1. He's going to be an impact in that offense. Dak Prescott is pretty accurate. He almost threw for 5,000 last year. Michael Gallup is still there too, but that's just coverage going a different way away from Amari Cooper. Now, Amari Cooper isn't the kind of guy that consistently demands double teams and triple teams and stuff like that, and you really can't do that with Michael Gallup even last year on the team, and then also having to worry about Ezekiel Elliott. But with CeeDee Lamb coming in, that's just going to open it up a little bit more. I think wide receiver 12 is a good spot for him. He's the number 1 on a team that, even though they do have Zeke, they obviously like to pass the ball a lot. Like I said, Dak Prescott had 4,900 last year. And yeah, I mean, I'd definitely be comfortable with him as my wide receiver 1 if I could load up on 2 really good running backs in the first 2 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, I'd take him if I could get someone a little bit more consistent after him. The thing I'm most worried about is Lamb. Actually, I think it could hurt. It could hurt him actually, just because there are so many pass catchers there now. Like I'm pretty high on Blake Jarwin, as you guys know, and now I'm kind of souring on him just because they drafted a CeeDee Lamb. So now they have 3 really competent wide receivers. They have tight ends. They have pass catching, backs. Dak Prescott runs the ball. They have so many things they could do. I really should be higher on Dak Prescott this year than I am. I'd probably have to raise him up in my rankings, but I'm a little nervous about Amari Cooper's consistency. But again, if I can get him as my wide receiver 1 and load up, like you said, I'll do that if I can get a consistent receiver after him.
Yeah, no doubt. And then let's go to number 11 here. That's going to be you, Blake. And speaking of consistency, you got a consistency guy right here. That's Mike Evans.
Yeah, Mike Evans, I think like early in his career was like really flashy. He was getting 12 touchdowns in 2014 and 2016, but he's kind of evened out here a little bit more now. He's always eclipsing 1,000 yards by a fair amount. He's not like 1,001. He's 1,000 and a couple hundred. So he's really good for the yardage. The touchdowns have come down quite a bit. Not quite a bit, but a third from 12. So he's around about 8 right now. Last season he missed 3 games, so he could have had even more touchdowns than that. The thing I'm a little nervous about is just Chris Godwin. There's the narrative that Brady's going to like Godwin a lot, and he's going to be throwing to him, and Brady can't throw deep and whatever. I don't know if that's necessarily true, and I think a lot of people are going to be trying to target Godwin. I'll take Evans if I can get him, just because I don't know if Brady's ever had has had in a while, at least, a really deep wide receiver that's on Evans's level. And they throw the ball a lot. That team. The only thing I'm again worried about, kind of like with the Cowboys, is there are so many targets there now. Like, I don't think Gronk's going to be that main tight end of it, like that they need. Like, it's going to be OJ Howard getting a lot of the work, and Gronk kind of brought in on like really important plays, but there's Brait, there's these rookie wide receivers like Scotty Miller coming in, there's Godwin, there's some pass catching running backs with LaShawn McCoy and some others. So I'm a little worried about him, but I think in terms of the fact that he's the main deep threat on the team, I'll draft him there, and I'll be happy to have him as a wide receiver 1 if I can get, on the kind of the other, like on the opposite of Amari Cooper, if I can get someone a little flashier after Mike Evans in the second round.
Yeah,
that's my second receiver.
With it's the tricky thing with Evans is like he gets this stigmatism that he is a deep threat, which he is. I mean, I'm not saying that he's not, but the thing is, like, people are kind of just disregarding that he's going to be a good receiver because Tom Brady's not the quarterback there, and that they think that his arm is about to fall off. In
Right.
New England, he just last year he didn't have a deep receiver. That's the kind of quarterback that he is. He throws over the middle. He throws to his running backs. He threw to Julian Edelman a lot, and that's where Chris Godwin's going to get a boost, and that's where Chris Godwin is a little higher on this list too. So we will be talking about him. But you're not just gonna phase Mike Evans out. He's still going to get his balls. He's still going to get his catches, and he's still going to get his touchdowns. And Tom Brady still can throw the football. There's no doubt about that.
One more thing I want to add that I forgot to mention. Do either of you know how old Mike Evans is?
He's like 25 or 26.
He's going to be 27 Friday. Happy early birthday. So he is still very young,
Yeah.
and definitely still has good years left in the tank. So I'll take him.
Yeah, he came in early, and he's, like I said, he's pretty consistent. He's about 79 catches, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns a season, basically.
Yeah, and I think that Tom Brady not being able to throw the deep ball narrative is a little played out. I mean, when you look at the numbers last year, he had the 9th best deep ball completion percentage in the entire league. So, I think it's a lot of people just looking at his age and making assumptions, but Tom Brady can still sling it.
He definitely can still sling it. Jordan, I made a little bit of a mistake here. I gave you the wrong guy, so I can either. So I'm going to go here and talk about Juju because he came in at 10 because I gave you 9 instead of 10. So Juju Smith-Schuster is the next one that comes up on our list, and you didn't really prep for him, so I'll talk about him. He's coming off a really down year compared to the year before when he had 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns, but he also had Antonio Brown on the other side of him. Big Ben threw the ball 626 times or whatever it was. Last year, Big Ben really didn't get to that number because he got hurt. And I think that's part of the reason why Juju, he's slipped and he's fallen at the same time. I don't know if, or he's slipped and he's rising at the same time. I don't know if that makes sense, but he's definitely fallen out of like the top 7, top 8 where he was being drafted last year. He was getting taken at the end of the first round in some leagues I've seen. And I mean, and if Big Ben would have played, maybe it would have been a different story. But now he's still a wide receiver 1 according to the rankings. He's still coming in. Now he's going a little bit later though, and it's again you never want to like consider your guys or bank on injuries or non-injuries or anything like that. But it's definitely one of those things where if Big Ben goes down, Juju is definitely going to drop, and if he goes down during the season, it's kind of a waste of a pick there because I don't think he's going to be that good. But if Big Ben's there, I think Juju is going to have a pretty solid season. Now we saw last year that their defense is definitely one of the top in the league. They only got better halfway through when they traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick, so they might not be throwing the ball as much. I don't think Ben's going to be throwing the ball 600 plus times like he did 2 years ago. But even with Ben still throwing the ball 500, 550 times, Juju's going to be a pretty relevant receiver.
Yeah, I've told you before, Jerry, but I really don't understand the Juju hype, honestly. I mean, after such a pitiful season, you would have thought that his ADP would have dropped at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's being drafted pretty it's pretty locked in that he's a wide receiver one for a lot of teams, and I'm personally just not that confident in it. When you keep talking about that 2018 season, he was ninth in points per game that year, and that's really where he's being drafted now. So you're really drafting him with the expectation that he's going to repeat that 2018 season, and I just don't see that happening. We haven't seen him as the guy yet, facing the top corners each and every week. And I mean, let's be honest, when Antonio Brown was there, all the attention was on Antonio Brown, and Juju was facing a team's second corner or even their slot corner, because he played in the slot quite a bit during that time. So I'm just not that confident that he can be a locked and loaded top 10 wide receiver like he's being drafted as.
Yeah, we really haven't seen him be the guy, have we, with Antonio Brown out of there? And to your point, I think right at the end of the season, he probably fell in ADP, right, when people started kind of maybe mocking again. But then I think people were like, oh, that's right, Big Ben's coming back. Let me just, try to get him as a steal. But then everyone was doing that, right? So his ADP went up. So, yeah, he's too rich for my blood. Give me, James Washington really late and see how he fares if I want a piece of this offense.
Yeah, I think between Mike Evans, Juju Smith-Schuster, and who you're about to talk about, Jordan, I'd probably rather have Mike Evans and I'll just break it, DJ Moore over Juju. So if they're all going around the same area, give me Mike Evans or DJ Moore first, and then Juju. He'd have to really fall for me to grab him. Even last year I wasn't all over him, and this year last year kind of helped with seeing that he's not a true number one, but now this year I'm not taking him. Going into number 9 here, Jordan, it's you for DJ Moore.
Yeah, this is our boy. So to kick it off, they do have a new offensive coordinator there in Joe Brady. And I keep saying that Joe Brady came from the Saints previously, and we saw it at LSU a little bit, but I think this offense is going to be run pretty similarly to what the Saints do now. And if you listen to Joe Brady talk about his offense at all, it's all about getting his playmakers in space, which, number one, bodes well for Christian McCaffrey because he's the best in the league at working in space. And DJ Moore is actually really underrated in that regard. He's one of the best yard after catch guys in the entire league. I found a stat once, and I really liked it, that he broke tackle on 40% of his catches last season. So I really thought that was impressive and shows his talent. I know a lot of people are concerned with Teddy Bridgewater, but first, Michael Thomas was the number 1 overall wide receiver when Teddy was in the game last year. So I know that's Michael Thomas, but I think Teddy Bridgewater can definitely support a top-end fantasy wide receiver. And I think DJ Moore's skill set really lines up well with what Teddy Bridgewater does, which is throw short to intermediate passes. And that's where DJ Moore really shines, and then you let him run after the catch. So I love DJ Moore this year. I think that he can potentially be the number 1 overall wide receiver. I think there's always an underrated candidate to make that jump. Not that I'm saying he's my number 1 ranked wide receiver, but I could definitely see him making that jump. Just a few other numbers that I saw from last season, too. From weeks 9 to 17 last year, he was actually wide receiver 6. So he's actually really close to jumping into that top 5. So he's already shown that he has that ability, and now he's going to have more consistent QB play. I know a lot of people got really excited after Kyle Allen passed for 4 touchdowns in his debut, but he really showed his true colors after that. He's not a starting quarterback in this league, not even close. And so he was really struggling between him and Will Grier, and DJ Moore still produced. So as much you can argue about Teddy all day, but Teddy's definitely an improvement over those guys.
Yeah, Teddy's a DJ Moore type of quarterback, so I'm really high on him. He's one of my favorite receivers. I think he could finish in the top 5. I wouldn't go as high as 1. I mean, the potential's there, but I think that he could finish in the top 5, top 6 this year, especially if that defense is as bad as it's supposed to be, and teams focus a little bit more on Christian McCaffrey.
And one thing I just want to add really quick is they're going to have to throw the ball. Look at that division. I mean, they have to throw the ball. They can't just rely on Christian McCaffrey. It won't happen.
All right, so moving on to number 8 here. Blake, you are the Bears fan, and you've already talked about a Viking, and now you're going to get a Detroit Lion. You got Kenny Golladay.
Yeah, lucky me. I'm getting all my opponents here. So Kenny Golladay, he started off his career not doing so great. He played 11 games, got 3 touchdowns. But this past season, he blew up for 11 touchdowns, which is pretty crazy. It kind of reminds you a little bit of the days of Calvin Johnson, which I miss so much. But it concerns me a little bit just because they kind of used him a lot in the red zone, it seems. But TJ Hawkinson's actually going to be coming back hopefully soon. I know he had some injuries, and they just also drafted another tight end. So I don't know if his touchdowns are going to kind of go up at all if you're expecting that. I think he could remain the same, maybe take a dip in touchdowns, but I think his yardage will probably go up. He only got around 1,100 yards, so I definitely think that can go up. They're also going to be bringing back, Danny Amendola, and Marvin Jones is always someone that's slept on and is a really good deep threat and a big playmaker, but I definitely like Kenny Golladay as a wide receiver 1, even though I do it begrudgingly being a Bears fan.
Yeah, he led the league in touchdowns last year with 11, and that was with half the season without Matt Stafford. And I know, Doc, if you were going to chime in on this, you'll probably say that Marvin Jones was more of Stafford's higher targets. But I mean, you can't deny Kenny Galladay's talent, and if Stafford's there for the whole season, and his defense, I think, is going to be a little bit better. The offense should be better with DeAndre Swift there, and maybe Kerryon Johnson could play more than a handful of games. I think overall Detroit could be pretty good, and Kenny Golladay is going to be a huge part of that.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but Marvin Jones was actually a top 10 guy with Matthew Stafford last season, and that kind of goes over the radar or under the radar, and that's a guy that Matthew Stafford really trusts. Marvin Jones actually outperformed Kenny Golladay in the first half of the season, so I'm interested to see if Stafford can develop that chemistry with Golladay. There's no doubt in my mind that Golladay is the more talented wide receiver, but I think he's really going to have to develop some chemistry with Stafford for him to take that next step forward.
And I think they will. And I think, honestly, Stafford slept on as a quarterback. Like, as much as I'm a Bears fan, like, I acknowledge how good of a quarterback Stafford is. I think I only started playing fantasy 10 years ago, and one of my first quarterbacks was Stafford. And honestly, he's so slept on. You can get him so late, and he's so good. That's going to have to translate over to Golladay. It's not all that's going to go to Marvin Jones, as good of a player as Marvin Jones is.
Exactly. And then because of my little blunder there with the DJ Moore and Juju Smith-Schuster, Jordan, you turn right back around and get to talk about Allen Robinson.
All right. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I think Allen Robinson is finally being respected because a lot of people just have him as the kind of guy like, oh, he just performs because he got a ton of volume and they have no other wide receivers, which is definitely true to a certain extent. I'll talk about Anthony Miller quickly, but I mean, this is one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL, and finally people are respecting him enough to take him as a surefire wide receiver 1, and based on his talent alone, I mean, it makes 100% sense. He had the 9th most fantasy points per game last year. I can't really see the Bears quarterback situation being any worse than it was last season. If anything, it'll be the same. If not, you would hope slightly improved. Yeah, and I'm sure you'll talk about that a little bit, but I mean, so he'll still have the majority of the targets there. He was 5th in target share last year with 27% of their targets going his way. The one argument I do hear against him quite a bit is that Anthony Miller is going to eat into his target share. I'm actually not on that bandwagon, and I looked at it a little bit. Anthony Miller had this really nice stretch from weeks 11 through 15 last season, and that's when a lot of people say, oh, Allen Robinson's production dipped, but not really, because he was still wide receiver 5 during that stretch. So if anything, it might take a little bit of the attention away from him and give him more open looks, but he's a guy, I love his talent. He's definitely going to have a huge target share, and I would definitely be taking him confidently as a wide receiver 1.
Jimmy Graham's going to dip into his target share.
Yeah, I'm sure he would.
Jimmy Graham had a nice little. There was a little clip I saw online at training camp. He looked pretty good. I think he's a little more alive in Chicago than he was in the Packers, but they don't like to use the tight end. So yeah, but to your point about Anthony Miller taking production away from him, I don't think that he will do that. I think he's going to be there to keep the defenses honest and have to they'll have to pay attention to both of them. Whereas we were talking about earlier with the Cowboys, there are so many players there to actually take away production. I don't think Anthony Miller will do that. I think he'll actually help Allen Robinson. I don't think Cole Kmet's going to be brought on just yet and be a factor this season enough to take away work from Robinson. I think maybe a combination of him, Mooney, whoever their wide receiver 3 is, if it's Riley that is, could maybe together take some production away, but by themselves, I don't think it'll happen. I think they're going to rely heavily on Allen Robinson. Hopefully they give him a contract renewal.
Yeah, and we should see a little bit of a boost from David Montgomery this year too. Hopefully, hopefully he does a little bit better than his 3.7 yards per carry last year. Going into number 6, we got our second Tampa Bay Buccaneer. That's Chris Godwin. He's coming off a career year there, 9 touchdowns, and this was with a quarterback that just, I mean, they also didn't have a run game either, which hopefully should be a little bit better this year with Ronald Jones going into another year and them drafting Keyshawn Vaughn. But even with an added run game, Chris Godwin is still, this is in startup dynasties, he's even going a little higher than wide receiver 6. He could arguably be like the second or third wide receiver off the board, taking him ahead of guys like Julio Jones. But in a redraft PPR, this is perfect for him. He's getting a quarterback now that we just talked about a little bit when you talked about Mike Evans, but he's getting a quarterback now that is he gets the ball and he gets it out of his hand as fast as he can, and that's the kind of routes that Chris Godwin runs, over the middle, slants, outs. He's a quick hitter type of receiver, catches the ball and just does magic with it. He scored 9 touchdowns last year. I don't know where he finished exactly, but he's wide receiver 6, so he's right in the middle of the top wide receiver tier. Yeah, I mean, between the two, this is one of those situations where Blake, you actually started to write about this, and you got an article coming out soon, I believe, where you talk about how there's 2 guys on one team, and you'd like to grab the later one and try to get value somewhere else. This is kind of that situation. I think I would take Mike Evans a little bit later than Chris Godwin, but if Chris Godwin's on my team as a wide receiver 1, knowing that he's catching balls from Tom Brady, knowing that offense is going to be clicking on all cylinders. Their front 7 is good on defense, but their secondary is still kind of bad, so they could still get some points scored against them and be in potential shootouts, so that just boosts Chris Godwin and Mike Evans up. But I love Chris Godwin, and I'm not shying away from him. I think I would just rather go Mike Evans a little bit later and go with maybe a running back in that Chris Godwin spot.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm wanting to take a running back earlier. Man, I would love Godwin. Really, I think it's not being said enough too, like how much of a leader Tom Brady is in the locker room. And so I think like now that they finally have that from the quarterback, not to say that Jameis Winston wasn't, but he just wasn't. He hasn't been in the NFL as long, and honestly, Tom Brady just like has that leadership quality, and it really will be able to instill some wisdom on his receivers because he wants to succeed here. He wants to show people he's not just a system quarterback. So I think Godwin's really going to flourish. But yeah, like you said, I'll take Evans later if I can get that running back in the first round.
Yeah, my favorite spot for Godwin in mocks that I've seen recently is if you have one of those top 3 picks. I've seen it quite a few times where you can grab McCaffrey, Barkley, or Elliott, then grab a second running back on the way back. And I've seen Godwin fall into that 3rd round a few times. So if you have 2 stud running backs and then you can grab Godwin, I mean, I'm pretty confident in that. Godwin was 2nd in points per game last season. He was number 1 in yards after the catch. So he was a beast last year, and that's not going to change with Brady this season. So if you get him in the right spot, I like him quite a bit.
All right, and then going on to you, Blake, with our number 5 guy here. This is the only player, just doing a quick look here, in the top. This is the only wide receiver in the top 35. So the 30 or the 25 that we talked about so far, plus the 5 that were right after them, that switched teams this offseason. Every other receiver that's on this list up until Brandon Cooks at 36 is still on the same team that they had last year. So DeAndre Hopkins with the Arizona Cardinals comes in at wide receiver 5.
Yeah, and you know what? I hope people keep caring about that. Let his ADP drop, please, because talent's going to win over here, guys. I don't know why people are letting him fall, but thank you. Kyler Murray is a great quarterback. Deshaun Watson is a great quarterback. I think it's going to take maybe a little time for DeAndre Hopkins to get used to the system. But overall, I think, the second 2/3 of the season or so, second half of the season, last 2/3 of the season, he's going to go off. I don't see how he can't. They have Christian Kirk there, fine, but Christian Kirk, I mean, I know you guys someone's going to talk about him in our next pod, but he hasn't been, that productive since he's been on the team. I think DeAndre Hopkins is really going to be the one there with Christian Kirk being the 2. They don't really use a tight end. They have Dan Arnold there, and obviously Larry Fitzgerald is still there to get some production, but ultimately I really don't see the main target not being DeAndre Hopkins. Kyler Murray is going to ball out again this season. I don't think he's going to hit that sophomore slump. It's really just a matter of DeAndre Hopkins getting that learning curve down because there really wasn't been much of a preseason. I just think he's going to flourish outside of fucking BOB's offense. Like, get out of here. I'm so glad he's off the Texans. Like, he's wasted there.
Yeah, anything you want to say about him, Doc?
Yeah, I mean, I don't let him slip too far, but I'm not the biggest DeAndre Hopkins fan this year, and it's nothing against his talent. I mean, I definitely agree he's by far the most talented wide receiver, but I mean, he really didn't have people to fight with for targets last season. That's my biggest thing. He's always been a volume-based play. I mean, he had 150 targets last season, and he was the 4th overall wide receiver in scoring. So I just can't see him getting 150 targets. And I know Larry Fitzgerald's old, but the guy had 109 targets last season. Christian Kirk's probably going to command around 100 targets or so. And I think they're really going to try to spread the ball around. That's not to say Hopkins will be a wide receiver 1, but I think I'm more confident in him as like a back-end wide receiver 1 than a surefire top 5 guy, just because I'm not confident that he's going to get the same volume that we've seen in the past.
Well, to your point, I know Will Fuller was hurt, but I know he wasn't a target guy. He was more of a touchdown guy. But they were both productive at the same time. And they, obviously they had Deshaun Watson. He's a great quarterback. But Kyler Murray's looking not too shabby himself. So personally, for me, I definitely would take him top 5 or maybe even top 3 wide receiver.
All right, now we're into our final 4 here, and the thing about all 4 of these guys is somebody, probably multiple somebodies, but at least one person in each case has them as number 1 on their individual lists. And so we're going to start here. Number 4, wide receiver 4 is Tyreek Hill, and it's going to be you, Doc.
Yeah, and I've always loved Tyreek Hill's talent. He's one of those guys that has that stigma as a speedy guy, that he's just a guy that runs fly routes down the field, but he really is a polished route runner, and he has great hands. And I've talked about that a little bit with Henry Ruggs, who has that same stigma right now, but they both have great talent as wide receivers as a whole. I mean, we've talked about the Chiefs offense in our mini series. There's not a lot to say. I mean, it's a great line, a great coaching situation, a great quarterback. It really has everything you need to succeed. I do think this could be a little high, because in his big 2018 season, he finished as the 4th highest wide receiver. So I do think you're paying for him at his peak performance, which with your first few picks, you normally are. But last season, he finished as the 11th wide receiver in terms of points per game, because he did miss some time. But, I'd be more comfortable drafting him somewhere between 4 and 11. I think that's really the range of outcomes that you could see from him this year. But there's no doubt in this offense he's going to be productive. He's going to be one of their top 2 targets. Him and Kelsey kind of share almost the same target share. So there's not much to say. I mean, he's definitely going to be productive in this offense.
Yeah, and the only thing that, he's a perfect best ball wide receiver. I mean, he's better than a best ball wide receiver. Best ball, you want to target those guys that are going to have those boom and bust weeks. He's going to have a couple multi-touchdown games, a few 8, 9, 10 catch games for 160 yards or whatever, but he's his overall at the end of the season is going to be a top 5, top 4 wide receiver, and that's why he's at where he's at. But he's going to have those games where he just absolutely bombs or bombs in a sense to where he's not giving you wide receiver 1 numbers, and that's the risk that I have with him. I really haven't ever been a Tyreek Hill guy. He's either been too rich for where I want to take him, or there's always been a guy around where he's been going that I'd rather have over him. But yeah, I mean, he's gonna single-handedly win you some weeks, and he's also gonna put you right on the cusp of losing, because he gives you an 8-point game when you needed 10 or something like that.
I think we have to mention it, even though necessarily sometimes we don't necessarily want to, but does his domestic violence situation kind of bring him down in your eyes in terms of ADP and either of you? Because for me personally, it does. I always kind of value those off-field things a lot higher than most people do, and just because I don't want to have to deal with it. For example, all the legal stuff that happened with Zeke a few years ago, that's just not a headache I want to deal with. So does that factor in for you guys?
For me, no, and they're not really talking about it. They're not really saying that he's going to be missing any time. There's no rumors or anything like that. So unless it comes back up and they say, okay, well, he's possibly facing a suspension, then that's when I would start to worry. But even then, like, it takes a little bit of time for them to figure out when and how long the suspension is. Like, when Zeke served his suspension, it wasn't the first 6 games of the season, it was later on in the season when you kind of knew, like, you had at the beginning of the year that it was probably coming. You just had to figure out when it was going to be. So we'll know ahead of time if something's going to happen with Tyreek Hill. But until then, it's like you draft him and you expect to have him for 16 games.
Yeah, for me personally in this situation, no, because they did sign him to a contract extension. So they're obviously pretty confident as an organization that it's not going to come back to haunt them. So in this case, I would say probably not.
All right, and then going into the top 3 here, my final guy is Julio Jones. He's been one of the best receivers since he came into the league. His only real down year was 2013 when he missed 11 games. Other than that, he's missed a couple of games here and there. But most of the time he's played 16 or 15 games, and that's about all you can really say about him. He's constantly over. I mean, you can't even say that he's over 1,000 yards. He's constantly over 1,300 yards since 2014. He's had over 1,300 yards every single season. The only thing with him is he kind of he's down on the touchdowns, or not. He's just not as up on the touchdowns as you would want out of your clear-cut, solidified wide receiver 1. He had 6. He's had 8 in his career. He's had a couple 6 in his career. He's had one season where he had 10. That was his highest season. But he's like, between the catches and the yardage that you get out of him, and playing on the offense with Matt Ryan, having Calvin Ridley on the other side, they bring in Hayden Hurst. They're a pass first offense. Their defense is kind of not good at all. You're basically getting a consistent wide receiver 1 week in and week out with Julio Jones, and when you're comparing players, and I brought this up a couple times before, but if you're talking to your buddies, you're sitting down talking at the bar, talking in a group chat, whatever, you're comparing wide receivers and you're saying, who's the best wide receiver that you see playing in today's game? One of the answers is always Julio Jones, and the other answer is X. So it's like, who's the best receiver, Julio Jones or Michael Thomas, Julio Jones or Devontae Adams? You're always comparing Julio Jones to the other guys. So it's like, in your mind, it's Julio Jones. That's the guy that's always coming up. And I mean, I absolutely love Julio Jones. We did a mock earlier this offseason. I don't remember if it was, it might have been right around draft time. Me and you, Jordan, we did it. We also did it. It was against a lot of computer players too, and Sleeper was kind of acting up at the time. So, but we did that mock, and Julio fell to the 4th round. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
And I mean, like, if he goes to the 4th round, that's a steal and a half. But like, even end of the 1st round, I mean, if I'm sitting there at the end of the 1st round and I could get like a Miles Sanders and Julio Jones, or even a Joe Mixon and Julio Jones, are sitting there at 11 or 12. I'm taking Julio Jones all day and pairing them up with a running back 1, and I'm going to be happy for the whole season.
Yeah, and we talked about before, he has that weird stigma where people have him labeled as injury prone. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he really hasn't missed significant time since 2013. And you and I have talked about that before, but he's played 16 games 4 different times in his 9-year career, and really every other year he's been at 15. So even though it seems like he's always questionable, he always plays through it. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it. The other thing that I always hear people say is his age. I mean, he's only 31. I think people act like he's 37 and he's due for a decline, but he's still at his peak performance as of right now.
Yeah, he's 31 is not. He's got a lot of miles on him, but for a wide receiver and in a redraft, like I said, take him all day long. Now, if you're in a dynasty draft, people put a lot of emphasis on age too, but maybe he's not going in the 1st round in dynasty leagues, but I'd still have him on my team in a dynasty league and have him for the next 3, 4, 5 years, however long he's going to be in the league, and Matt Ryan sticks around. Going on to number 2 here, who could arguably be the number 1. I mean, Julio could also arguably be the number 1 as well, but Devontae Adams, I think, has an even better chance of being number 1, especially with the lack of weapons out there in Green Bay. And I mean, we've had every single NFC North one wide receiver from the NFC North on this top 15, and Blake gets 3 of them, but not the Bear.
What you mean?
Blake, you get Devontae Adams.
Yeah, lucky me. I got Devontae Adams. Missed out on Allen Robinson, but that's okay. Devontae Adams is a great enough talent for me to take that hit. Honestly, he's my number 2 wide receiver off the board after Michael Thomas. I mean, guys, this is pretty easy. Aaron Rodgers is still great. He hasn't been as good the last couple seasons, but he's Devontae Adams is his number 1 wide receiver. Who do they draft? No one. They didn't draft any wide receivers. They literally drafted a quarterback and a running back. And Jordan Love's not running away with the job. Maybe A.J. Dillon takes work away from Aaron Jones, but he's not playing wide receiver. They have Allen Lazard.
Not with those thighs.
Yeah, I mean, Allen Lazard kind of came on last year, but I don't think he's gonna be anywhere near as a wide receiver too. Like he'll be kind of still in competition with like the likes of MVS, Equanimeous St. Brown. Now he's coming back. Reggie Begelton, I'm hearing, might be a little bit of a sleeper, but really Devontae Adams is going to be getting most of this work. They have Jay Sternberger. They just drafted Josiah DeGuara. Robert Tonyan just got a little hype today, but they don't really use the tight end. They forgot how to use tight end after they got rid of Jeremiah Finley. They didn't use Martellus Bennett properly. They didn't use Jimmy Graham properly. Devontae Adams is the guy. Don't overthink it. I don't care if you're a Bears fan, a Lions fan, a Vikings fan. Just draft him as your wide receiver 1 if you fall to you, because he's going to be a great value. And I don't care if Aaron Rodgers is pissed about Jordan Love. Hell, that's great. That might have a chip on his shoulder and show he has something to prove, and maybe go out and get a contract somewhere else or get some interest somewhere else and use Devontae Adams as the way to display that.
Yeah, I mean, Devontae Adams is definitely going to have some single weeks where he's the wide receiver 1, so he's definitely an excellent play. He's going to be one of your highest DFS guys week in and week out. He's going to be he's got some plus matchups. I mean, Detroit's defense, their secondary really isn't that good, so he'll probably be a really good plus matchup in those defenses or in those games. Minnesota's secondary is depleted, so he's going to be a plus matchup in those 2 games when they play. So I mean, that's 4 games right there, plus whoever else they play this year. But yeah, I mean, Devontae Adams, he's going to finish some weeks as wide receiver 1, and he very well possibly could finish the season as wide receiver 1. But for now, going into the season, sorry, go ahead.
One little thing I want to add too. It just came out that the Bears aren't playing any home games or for the foreseeable future with fans. The Packers love having the crowd noise and love having their fans in their stadiums. So the Bears are kind of like a daunting matchup for Aaron Rodgers, at least the defense. So Devontae Adams playing at Soldier Field without any real fans, getting in Aaron Rodgers' way of anything. I think honestly that's a real plus for Devontae Adams. It might it's nothing substantial, and it's not going to put him over the top over Michael Thomas, but I definitely think that's something else to consider as well.
Yeah, I don't think they need to worry about the 0-16 Bears. But going into number 1 here is Michael Thomas. He's a consensus number 1. I think pretty much throughout our rankings all summer long, we've pretty much had Michael Thomas as number 1. I've dabbled with Julio at number 2, Devontae Adams at number 2, DeAndre Hopkins up there at number 3, possibly 2. But Michael Thomas for the whole time has been number 1, and for good reason, breaking NFL records last year. And Doc, you get to talk about him first.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. I mean, one interesting fact when I was going through his stats that I found was he was never the number 1 overall wide receiver in any single week. So just kind of interesting to think about him breaking records, but he was never actually the number 1 overall wide receiver in a single week. So just a random interesting fact. But, I mean, besides that, I think the only other point I can make is I don't think I'll have 186 targets again. I do think Emmanuel Sanders will bite into that a little bit. And just because Michael Thomas hasn't had a strong wide receiver too, they were hoping Traquan Smith could have been more, but he really never broke through. So Emmanuel Sanders is another guy running short to intermediate routes. So he will bite into that target share a little bit, but you're talking the difference between 186 targets to 150 to 160 probably. So this is a guy that's still the number 1 overall wide receiver in a great offensive scheme. So not much else to say.
No, not at all. Anything on him, Blake?
No, the only thing I would say is, Emmanuel Sanders is there now. He might take away a little bit of work, and Kamara apparently was playing with an injury last year. He might take away some work from him, but I think Michael Thomas is still going to overcome that. I mean, I'm a sucker for narratives, and this is seemingly Drew Brees' last season, and he's going to ball out. He's going to want to get that Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think they could do it without really Drew Brees throwing the ball a ton. They've definitely they dropped his passing down a little bit over the past couple seasons, and even last year he was down in passing, but still had Michael Thomas break the catches record. Kamara, we could just pretty much slot in for 81. That's just what he does. And yeah, I mean, until somebody dethrones Michael Thomas as the number one, and until somebody else has taken 160, 170, 180 targets and turning it into 150 catches, then Michael Thomas is going to be up there. So that does it. Just recapping the 15 that we talked about today. Kicked off the day with Robert Woods, Adam Thielen at 14, Odell Beckham Jr. at 13, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Moore at 9, Kenny Galladay, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, and DeAndre Hopkins make up Tier 2. And then Tier 1 is Tyreek Hill, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, and Michael Thomas. Any surprises that of the 15 that we talked about today?
Not really. I mean, we've all drafted quite a bit to know where these guys can fall and what's said about them, especially with these upper tier guys. It's sort of the same old.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, none of them really stick out to me. I mean, I think a lot of them are pretty. I won't say consensus in terms of that order, but a lot of them you can mix and match, and they're normally in your top 15.
Does a little tidbit I said about DeAndre Hopkins, does that, I mean, not that it's shocking, but does that mean anything? Does that, like I said, he's the only one in the top 35 that changed teams. Now, a couple of these guys have obviously changed quarterbacks. DJ Moore has a new quarterback. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans have new quarterbacks. Juju Smith-Schuster, I guess, technically has a new quarterback as Big Ben didn't play last year. But does that mean anything to you guys? You already talked about him a little bit, Blake. So
yeah.
But yeah, does it mean anything?
Go ahead.
I think if it means anything, it means just something about how you're making up your team, like makeup. If you kind of are a little nervous about him and think he's not going to be as good, then maybe take someone else, or go higher upside with another pick. That's really all.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most underrated pieces of a wide receiver success is really their chemistry with a quarterback. So, I mean, naturally, it's going to take a little bit of time to develop that with Kyler Murray. Not enough where he should fall out of the top 10 or anything crazy like that. But, it wouldn't surprise me if during the first few weeks of the season, he struggled a little more than you're used to seeing. They do play the 49ers week 1, so that'll be a nice test for him.
Yes, him and Richard Sherman get to go at it. So that's going to do it. Make sure you guys tune into all of our podcasts. They are on YouTube if you want to watch the video. They do get uploaded to Anchor, which is audio, but then Anchor distributes out to Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. So check it out if you're listening at work, you want to listen on your drive to work, if you're going on a long road trip and you don't want to listen to music anymore, listen to us. Check out our website. It's thefantasymafia.com. Check out our 2 Facebook pages that we got. The main page is Fantasy Mafia. And then our sister page, which is the forum, basically, is the Fantasy Hotspot. In the Hotspot, you can go in there and just start some topic conversations. You can enter in our Razzes. We just threw out a couple league invites that we're doing now. We're running a free league this year where you could potentially win a mystery box autographed jersey. So we don't even know what the jersey is. It's going to be a mystery box that we open up on camera. Yeah, and just keep on looking out for other leagues that we got. Other than that, check out our Twitter, check out YouTube, check out everything. I mean, we're a couple weeks away from the start of the regular season. Houston and Kansas City kick us off within a couple Thursdays, and then we got a full slate of Sunday games. NFL's talking about possibly utilizing Saturday for if college isn't playing, so maybe we'll get some Saturday games, but Yeah, I mean we're getting there, and there's really no talk or anything or any whisperings of shutting down. It sounds like they're going to play and play on time, and that's going to be with how crazy 2020 has been. That's what we're all looking forward to. So until the next episode, I'm Jerry with Blake and Jordan. We'll see you guys next time.